The following video is sponsored by NordVPN. Stay tuned for a message later on in the video. It's time for the great collab of 2020, as together with Zeltik over 2 videos, we provide the most detailed account of why Breath of the Wild sequel will be the most ambitious and with it the best Zelda experience to date. And to show appreciation for the massive amount of work that was put into these 2 videos, be sure to leave a like, as we're going for at least 5,000 in this one, subscribe for way more Zelda and Breath of the Wild 2 on our 2 channels, plus press that notification bell and for all notifications. But now, let's get inside Breath of the Wild sequel like never before. Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild was Nintendo's most ambitious game to date. No wonder, as it was the Kyoto-based company's first true open-world game, one that allowed us to go almost anywhere, do whatever we pleased and intentionally break the in-game rules thanks to the Sheikah runes and the built-in physics engine. Redefining this most costly of game genres required the biggest development team, most time and effort of any project made by Nintendo to date. The production cost of the project has no equal in Nintendo's long history, and Breath of the Wild's open era of Hyrule, with its sophisticated physics engine and gameplay, was just too expensive to develop and only implement in one game. Thus, the Zelda team decided to reuse this masterpiece of an organic world for 3 DLC packs. No doubt, the idea of DLC packs was planned in order to reuse the open era of Hyrule before moving on to the next game. Such was the case in DLC Pack 1, the Master Trials, and especially DLC Pack 2, the Champion's Ballad. Nevertheless, to the Zelda team that wasn't enough, and when the 3rd and final DLC pack grew out of proportions in the planning stages, a much more ambitious sequel was born in its stead. And that is where we are. Breath of the Wild, with its over 20 million copies sold across the world, an untraditional Zelda fanbase that sadly is less interested in the other games in the franchise and instead hungry for an experience that can top their first adventure in Hyrule. In other words, the Zelda team is currently facing the highest levels of expectations ever, as a result of implementing the best gameplay in an open world game the last decade, winning the Game of the Year award at the Game Awards 2017 and 200 other Game of the Year awards doesn't exactly lower expectations. The same goes with the development time of the sequel. They will most likely stretch from 2017 to 2021, which is a lot to deliver new content, gameplay experiences, story and locations.
In other words, a challenge that is very similar to what the Mario team faced after Super Mario Galaxy when developing Super Mario Galaxy 2. That and what Eiji Aonuma experienced when developing Majora's Mask after Ocarina of Time's 99 on Metacritic. Breath of the Wild may have a little less with 97, the same as Super Mario Galaxy, but it's no doubt the Ocarina of Time of our time. Luckily though, unlike Majora's Mask, the sequel to Breath of the Wild will have far more than a year of development, and as such, it won't have to cut corners to make a set deadline. Instead, hopefully it can focus on addressing the few but major shortcomings of the original, expanding on and enriching the characters and already massive map from Breath of the Wild, delivering an experience that will redefine Hyrule and possibly the entire Zelda franchise. During Hidemaru Fujibayashi's tenure as director of the modern 3D Zelda games, each excelled at the sacrifice of something else. Skyward Sword had the best story and storytelling in the Zelda franchise, but lacked freedom of exploration due to its linearity, and its gameplay was therefore severely bound. Breath of the Wild offered the greatest gameplay and freedom in the entire franchise, though its open air and nearly completely non-linear organic approach meant that it severely lacked in its storytelling, as the plot was fragmented across the world of Hyrule, and the dungeons too were a mere shadow of the massive temples seen in past titles.
With Breath of the Wild sequel bringing back Ganondorf for the first time since 2006 Twilight Princess, it is obvious that the story will get a more prominent position once again. Though, unlike what was the case in Skyward, we believe that the Zelda team doesn't want to make sacrifices to the gameplay and overworld, hence why they are reusing the same map to achieve the impossible balance of story, gameplay and freedom of exploration. In other words, the time has come for the greatest Zelda game, or more precisely the greatest game of all time. And how do we do that? By breaking the cycle of the direct sequel being worse, or not giving as much love and development time as the original. This was the case for Zelda 2, which was nowhere near as well received as Zelda 1, Link's Awakening to A Link to the Past, and Phantom Hourglass to The Wind Waker. all games that were inferior to the first adventure featuring the same Link. Though there's one exception that could have easily surpassed the original if it got the same development time as Ocarina of Time, and that is Majora's Mask. The 3-day cycle instead of 7, 4 dungeons instead of 7 or 8, and so on made a difference. But still, Majora's Mask had a great story to tell, which much like Link's Awakening wasn't bound to the simplistic premise found in each Hyrule game. Since the Legend of Zelda franchise, despite being known as the story franchise of Nintendo, has been distanced by all kinds of other RPGs and adventure games when it comes to in-depth storytelling.
Which shouldn't come as a surprise, as the Zelda series has always been stuck with more or less the same premise. Boy pulling or forging a legendary sword to challenge evil and rescue a girl. Breath of the Wild's true ending followed this formula as the sword was pulled twice by the same Link, a series first. The girl was liberated and the puppet defeated. Now it's time to bring the fight to the puppet master, who might pull a shocking plot twist or two and thus elevate Zelda's storytelling to a new level. A taste of what Zelda will be after the Nintendo Switch. Just think of this, a direct sequel obviously can't tell the same story as the original. It needs to distance itself from it to surprise us and subvert our expectations. In other words, they should develop further on the characters, add plot twists, and make us care for the continuation of the plot. Tools which were successful in games like Link's Awakening and Majora's Mask. As well as this, Breath of the Wild 2 could address some of Breath of the Wild's many mysteries, such as the specific timeline placement, the nature of the Triforce in the era of the Wild, Ganondorf's past, the dragons, and the Leviathan skeletons, to name a few. This is what makes this sequel so special, as for the first time we have a direct follow-up Zelda set in the same Hyrule.
You know what's also special? Our sponsorship with NordVPN. With NordVPN, you will be safe as it provides encryption that will keep your online activity away from your government and hackers, and more importantly, let you access servers from around the world. This way, you can subscribe to and watch the latest movies and shows on Disney+, which is still not available in my country. And all you need to do is simply clicking and in seconds connecting to one of NordVPN's US servers. In fact, you can take advantage of servers placed in over 60 different countries, which allows me to watch Polish TV shows from Norway and the other way around. That's how it is when you have dual identity. You want to watch news and shows from both countries you have a bloodline in. You know what also has a duality? The double encryption NordVPN offers, which means that you can enjoy your favorite content on all of your devices, even in countries that block access to content, and feel safe while doing so. NordVPN also comes with a desktop app and iOS and Android apps where you can set up automatic boot up to your favorite server and not have to think about logging in when you turn on your device. And best of all, by supporting the channel and biting over to nordvpn.com/commonwealth or clicking the link in the description below, you will get 68% off on their 2-year plan. Using our link below, you will get 1 extra month of NordVPN for free. Plus, they have a 30-day money-back guarantee if you're not happy. That's nordvpn.com/commonwealth. And now back to the fact that the sequel started as DLC pack free, which was confirmed in several interviews with series producer Eiji Aonuma and game director Hidemaru Fujibayashi. Naturally, under these circumstances, it is unavoidable for the game to not be subject to criticism upon release if it's too similar to Breath of the Wild. It is also impossible to pull the parallel universe card which Super Mario Galaxy 2 pulled to its plot to retell more or less the same story. As such, Breath of the Wild sequel will have a different, deeper, emotional, darker, and far more impressive story, pretty much pulling in Majora's Mask instead of a Twilight Princess, despite the latter very likely being tied to the plot of Breath of the Wild 2, a game which tells an original story, but at the same time does not change too much as familiarity is crucial, hence the emphasis on the holy trinity of the Zelda franchise. Din, Nair, and Faror, power, wisdom, and courage, and Ganondorf, Zelda, and Link, which together make up the Triforce. The only 3 characters shown in the reveal trailer with the exception of the mysterious new element, the glowing hand, which we'll soon get back to. Oh, and a golden opportunity to finally break the eternal curse introduced in Skyward Sword.
Prior to Skyward Sword, the Zelda Chronicle was split and moved further and further away from its origin point, Ocarina of Time. Each branch continued to live a life of its own as separate realities, but with Skyward Sword, the Zelda team and Hidemaru Fujibayashi brought to people's attention, or at least reminded, that these stories were connected and had an origin point. This is the reason why Demise's curse of reincarnation was so prominent in the climax of the game, as it became the origin point of the timeline. Ganondorf's rise, the timeline splits, and with it, all of Hyrule's suffering. Breath of the Wild continued on with what was set up in Skyward Sword. Ganondorf, Malice, and Dark Beast Ganon being hatred reincarnated, Zelda being a descendant of the goddess Hylia, and Link the eternally reincarnated spirit of the hero. Skyward Sword was the beginning of the curse, and Breath of the Wild the beginning of its end. How? By confronting the calamity, holding it for 100 years, and then destroying Ganondorf's puppet. Breath of the Wild 2, however, could be a bid to end the curse, and with it, the timeline as we know it. 100 years ago, Zelda finally awoke her powers. Link followed a century later, and now it's Ganondorf's turn, so that the three chosen by the Triforce can come together for one final duel. A duel that has been teased through Ocarina of Time, The Wind Waker, and Twilight Princess, where we faced Ganondorf with Zelda by our side. This is the 4th time where the three are once again united, and it could be for the final time in this existing timeline.
One thing is certain, this is not Breath of the Wild all over again. As already in the opening, the Zelda team has broken another Zelda convention, Link and Zelda confronting Ganondorf with the Master Sword, in what is likely the very beginning of the game. From here, things can go in a number of different directions, and it is the fact that we are unable to predict how this ultimate confrontation and climax of the Zelda franchise will unfold that makes the plot and quest of Breath of the Wild 2 so thrilling. It will be a bigger Zelda story than in any prior game, with proper voice acting in the present, not in the past, something we barely got a taste of outside of Divine Beast related moments in Breath of the Wild. The stakes are much bigger than in Breath of the Wild, where Ganondorf was barely foreshadowed by Urbosa. With it we should be prepared for a much deeper, more cinematic, and most of all story-driven Zelda experience that will continue the main emphasis of Breath of the Wild, breaking written and unwritten Zelda conventions, including the Zelda timeline, as we literally press the skip to the ending button with Breath of the Wild, tens of thousands of years after the known events of the official Zelda timeline, or as the timeline is known in Breath of the Wild, the distant past. It's been there in front of us since 2017. Well, that and the underused heroic green set of the Wild, a set that is certain to gain prominence and likely replace the champion tunic at a certain point in the game. Clearly, the time for resolutions has arrived, and with it the timeline itself will become a crucial storytelling tool, as Ganondorf has been through it all since Ocarina of Time. With that, and potentially covering much of this map in Malice, you know the story of Breath of the Wild 2 will be something truly special compared to any other game in the franchise. So no doubt, the number one reason why Breath of the Wild 2 will be the best Zelda game is its story and storytelling, and bigger cast of voiced characters. In fact, we only need one to give us the answers: Ganondorf with a truly epic voice, plus a way more professional voice cast that is used frequently throughout the game. As we have already mentioned, the best Zelda game cannot achieve best in the series status based on story, voice acting, and its pacing alone. Hence why Skyward Sword is far from being the best game in the series. It needs the best gameplay seen in the series. One of the most crucial details missing in Breath of the Wild are proper dungeons, and we'll get back to it as well, since dungeons are only one major part of the gameplay that will make its way inside Breath of the Wild 2. Another could once again be, like in Breath of the Wild, mini dungeons. Replacing the 120 Sheikah shrines in the base game is no small feat to accomplish, as people got used to them, and though it is presumed that there will be a greater emphasis on traditional dungeons this time, we still hope for some overworld mini dungeons akin to the shrines in Breath of the Wild. After all, none of the Sheikah shrines or Sheikah towers can be seen in central Hyrule when Hyrule Castle left off in the reveal trailer. Same goes for the Sheikah shrines, which might indicate fewer mini dungeons this time around.
Say 8 to 10 proper dungeons and fewer than 50 mini dungeons, which are not tied to the ancient past of the Sheikah's shrines, but rather from a different ancient age, like the age of the Zonai. After all, removing overworld mini-dungeons would remove one of the greatest incentives to explore the land, and with new locations for mini-dungeons, we'll be more eager to re-explore the existing map, and of course any new areas. Despite bringing back the existing map, it's likely that the Zelda team will redefine or reinvent Hyrule with new locations for not only mini-dungeons, but also overworld bosses.
We'll talk about those, minigames, the soundtrack and much more in a few weeks' time. But for now, be sure to check out Zeltik's video on the mystery of the Gerudo Leviathan skeleton over on his channel. And as always, like this video, subscribe to our channels Commonwealth Realm and Zeltik with notification bells on, which helps tremendously, and then be sure to head over to Zeltik's channel to watch his part. We'll see you in the next one.